Welcome back to Real Estate Therapy. And today, what's on my mind, and one reason I'm having this particular guest with me, is that somehow when I think about food and things I want to eat, Sabrina Gee-Shin comes to mind because I associate her with real estate, but also with food. And I don't know, Sabrina, if I've shared this with you, but I have this theory that there's an inverse relationship between how well the market is doing and how much food is being offered to agents on brokers tour. Okay.
Remember? Yeah.
Like the more food on brokers tour, the harder it is to sell a house. But like if you build a shrimp tower, they will come. So that's kind of my entry point. But Sabrina Gee-Shin is known to me. She's a colleague. She's a friend. We've actually worked together.
Yeah.
And I'm a fan. And she is multifaceted. I can't wait for everybody here to get to know her. And I just noticed that not only are you a really good cook, and I know you took lessons in making Chinese dumplings, but you also have a master's in public policy from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, which is very, very nice credentials for anybody to have, particularly a real estate agent. Anyway, Sabrina, would you like to introduce yourself now that I've rambled on like this?
So I am a San Francisco native. I grew up both in Visitation Valley for my infanthood and then primarily grew up in Diamond Heights. And I currently live in outer Richmond. I am Chinese American, third generation. I married a Korean American. So my kids, I have two boys, a 26-year-old and a 23-year-old. Yeah.
And the outer Richmond, is it like just a natural place? I mean, all of San Francisco is such a melting pot, but to have, you've got the Korean. Do you ever go to that Korean barbecue? Is the one like at 18th and
19th and Balboa?
Yeah. Do you go there?
We do. That's my mother-in-law only wants to go there. We've been to a lot of different places. She doesn't like the ones that are kind of shishi, nouveau, whatever. And she judges Korean restaurants by their panchan, those little side dishes.
Right.
And some of them are very, they are not generous with that particular one. So that's how, there's so many new places, but she's very not open-minded to other places.
Well, I mean, the one at 19th and Balboa is a destination. There are buses that pull up and, people waiting in line to get in there.
It's hard to get parking around there. So because there's a bus. Usually there's a bus.
I know. So about my theory on food and brokers tour, do you think I'm right about that? Have you noticed that?
No, I haven't seen a lot. Like food was frequent. Part of it was the food was provided by the lenders. You would invite a lender to co-host, and they would have cheese platters or baked cookies, and then at some point they couldn't do it. I don't know if it's a RESPA thing. I don't know what it is. And then there's some really cool agents certain agents have their shtick, their thing that they're specialized in. And I actually, I don't know. This is just my own personal thing. I feel uncomfortable having pre-made platters of stuff. Sometimes there's Greek versions and all this kind of stuff. But to me, love is handmade. And so that's why dumplings are a huge part of my other alter ego. My Instagram name is Kimchi Mama. And I think I just grew up that I have this association that store-bought food doesn't have as much heart as homemade food. So there was this one listing I had where it had incredible stove. Like when you looked at it, it looked kind of like a computer. And when you pulled out this drawer, it was the little grills.
I remember that listing.
I don't even, what was the brand? I don't know if it was a Kifo Merit. I don't
It was
even know.
it was a vintage stove, and it
Vintage
seems like I remember it was maybe had a really cool color, like pink or blue or something.
I don't even, or
The whole
mustard.
house was amazing.
There was a sunset house, and that I had never seen this. And so I decided, I gotta cook gyoza. I gotta cook dumplings on this thing. And so, it became a part of the marketing, part of the Instagram story, just inviting brokers, to it. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I lined up. I was there. I actually think I was legit in that I had a buyer at the time who might have been a fit for the house, but the gyoza didn't hurt, you know. In fact, I think it was toward the end of the open house time, and you were discounting them a little bit. Like,
take 3, take 4.
I don't know. When I was a new agent, I can remember a couple of agents who I knew. The 2 who come to mind are no longer in the business. And if you had food, you would see them. I would see them double parking and running in and then running out with like a little paper plate piled high with, sandwiches, cookies, maybe juggling a Diet Coke in one hand, going back to their car. I don't know if they ever sold anything.
I think it's a very nice gesture, but I also remember the days when you have to bring all the leftovers over back to the office or all that kind of stuff. So it is, if it's not all gone, yeah.
Well, so with your dumpling making, what are you cooking at home these days? What are you into?
Well, I want to kind of go back to the dumpling making a little bit. So just a little bit of, so again, I'm Chinese American. And so I grew up with my grandmother being the cook, and she makes wonderful wonton. Separately, I have a client who owns Chaya, which is the Japanese vegan restaurant on Valencia.
Yep,
and
I know right where it is.
I think she just had a picture of her gyoza platter, and it looks like a rosette rather than just individual like Chinese where you see like 6 in a row. Hers was like kind of this bouquet of dumplings. I was like, how do you do that? And she told me her secret, and I go, oh my God. So I basically started doing that at home, and I was trying to teach my son. He was about to go to college. He had a lot of food allergies, and so I wanted to make sure he knew how to cook, that he didn't have to depend on the cafeteria for his food. And so we did it at home, and his friend was, I don't know, videotaping it. And he goes, because it's kind of like a party trick, the way it's done. It's, you flipping it over and it's like, voila. And he posted on Instagram, and it got all these hits. Like, watch Kimchi Mama make, gyoza. And so all of a sudden, so I kind of reposted it, and I got all these likes, and people would say things like, I want to learn, will you teach me? And I don't know if people were just like saying that or they really meant it. And so this is also, I'm going back in time politically. Trump had just gotten elected. Mm-hmm. And when he got elected for president, there was this new tone of being adversarial, that humans, it's like us versus them. He made me frankly fearful of my other human beings on this planet. And it made me, I didn't like where it was, I didn't like the person I was becoming, or I didn't like that I was in retreat of humanity. And so I said, I know my sisters and brothers in this world are better humans than what's being portrayed. And so I decided to put myself out there and invite people into my home. So, and then when I feel very privileged to own a home, I I would love for my home literally to be a shelter for other folks, to be a place, a safe space. And so he got elected. I have this new fun hobby. So I posted on Facebook. I said, hey, does anyone want to learn how to make gyoza? And within 24 hours, I had 20 people who wanted to come to my home and learn. And so I had to figure out the logistics. Like, oh my God, I needed to go to Costco and buy tables. I had to like buy extra knives. I had to figure out like create stations. Like, okay, I'll have 5 people at my dining room table, and I'm going to convert my living room into a cooking school. So like literally whenever I do these classes, and I've had over 300 people through my home in the past, ever since he got elected.
I love it.
And so people would, and it was a way to teach certain knife skills. Because for me, when you can cook, it's like very empowering to feel, to smash ginger and to dice garlic and to understand all the health components of dumplings. And I love it when, what was really cool. So imagine 20 people, or actually I did groups of 10 in my home. We went around and I asked people, these are people who don't know each other. So the only connection they have is like they are a Facebook friend of mine. So one was my childhood best friend when we were 4 years old. Another person was a former client. Another person was a teacher. And they would invite their friends. And so my home would become, and we call them, every graduate that would come through my home, we call them the gyoza tribe. Would say, Sabrina, how much do I owe you? And I would say, what you need to bring is a pound of meat, could be chicken, could be pork, could be beef, and an onion, and a chopping board, apron, a knife, and a Ziploc bag, and a bowl, mixing bowl. I'll supply everything else, all the veggies, all the mushrooms, all the chives. And so people would say, well, how much do I owe you? And to me, this was a gift. To me, it was just like connecting human beings with one another. And they kept on pushing me. No, really, what do I owe you? And I said, well, you can make a $20 donation to my favorite nonprofit in Chinatown, a place called Cameron House. And I was able to raise probably $3,000 for, a nonprofit I care about. And then just be again in human connection. So that's the gyoza.
That's inspiring. I mean, and gyoza is like a little envelope of love as far as I'm concerned.
It is. It is.
It's just the sweetest, yummiest thing. And to be able to be part of making them is great. But what you just said hits on some really important themes where real estate are concerned, because I think that foundational to real estate is the idea that our homes are our shelters, our sanctuaries. It's where we are safe, and it's where we can be part of a larger community. There is this tendency, and we've seen it a lot lately, where people kind of isolate in their castles and they put up all their walls. And home is really, I think, at its best is a place where not only can we be safe and with our families and with our loved ones, but where we can open up to others, and how enriching that is for us. And as realtors, how enriching to be able to be the person who helps create that or make space for that. And we're kind of hitting on fundamental stuff. Food and shelter is, that's survival. That's survival at the minimum. And it's a life with purpose and love and community in a bigger sense.
When I meet with clients, particularly buyers, and I ask them what's important about the purchase of their home, and I ask them to distill it in one word. and for husbands and wives or partners or whatever it is, it's very important when I do this sort of, it's part of an initial consultation. I actually focus on one of the partners first, and I ask the other person not to interject. And then I switch modes, and I usually start with the person I know the least. And I ask them, what's important about buying a San Francisco home to you? And there's many ideas, like people have several. I said, I know you have a lot of thought bubbles. I want you to pick the most important one and distill it in one word. And so sometimes, and we dig deep about why that is. So for example, for one client, being a gracious host was one of the most important features. And that because part of his business, is his wife is an amazing chef, and part of hosting people was a part of his business plan, frankly. And so that was like one person. Another person, they used the word sanctuary because he was actually a doctor at General Hospital, and his job, he remembers when he was a young doctor, there was this, one of his mentors would always have everybody over to hang out, to decompress. And so he wanted to provide that for future residents and future. So, or other people, they're big gamers, like box game night, they host bot. And so that's like those are part of being social folks. And, that's just the social part. But the other people, they want to retreat. They have very stressful lives, and to come home, for them, bright light is super important part of their healing. Yeah.
I think that we all need these different things from home, and yet do you find that when we're working with our clients, sometimes they are thinking, well, I need to be doing this, I need to be looking for that. They're kind of marching down this path that they've heard about, right? And when in fact, their path is different. Like they don't need to be focusing on proximity to the kids' school. Let's say that for some reason that's actually not a thing, but they've been told, well, don't buy in a place that doesn't have a good school district, right? Because your investment won't be good. Right. That's just a random example, and actually doesn't really apply in San Francisco, but we're not talking about just San Francisco. But I find people sometimes they're focusing on the wrong thing, like the wrong thing for them. They're thinking about, maybe.
So how do you discover, like, how do you give your clients clarity about that?
Well, I'll answer your question, but then I think that one thing I do is I continually try to just hold in my body and mind the idea that I'm the midwife for finding their home and for holding the idea that this is their home. And they may only be thinking about interest rates and, is this neighborhood a neighborhood my friends would like, and, whatever. But I hold on to the idea of it as home. And maybe they can't even articulate it. Maybe it's just intuitive. But what I want to hear more about from you is, you said something before we started this conversation about how good decisions come from clarity.
Yes.
And I agree with you on that, and clarity comes from having good information, clarity, good decisions. But I think you said that that's really key, that's the thing you're looking for with clients, is helping them get clarity. My clients, we do not look at properties
until we've had a really thorough, dig deep, like soul searching conversation. And so, and what I found is that partners don't often, they stop hearing each other because they're sort of like, and so there was a couple that we met with where the wife was the kind of the driver of the process, and the husband was more the nurturing one. And really important to him was a garage, and not to park the car, but he has lots of hobbies, like I guess fixing motorcycles and stuff like that. And so she seemed to feel like, that's kind of an extra feature, and or not as important. Like, if we get the perfect house, it doesn't have to have that extra hobby space. And so I asked him, I said, what's important about that space? He goes, it's my way of decompressing. And I go, what, imagine you don't have that space. He goes, then I can't be a good father.
Right.
And so that space was not about the square footage. It wasn't really about the hobby. It was about him being decompressed so that he can be the loving father that is required. And
Right.
so all of a sudden, what became a marginal piece, it was now a deal breaker.
Yep.
So it took sort of a little bit of digging deep in intervention and listening, and like creating that space for each person to listen, that we got clarity. So now we know we can't look at it as a one-car garage. It has to be, as big
I can imagine what a gift that would be, for me, if I were your client, because I've been both the wife and the husband in that case, where I've been wanting to be heard by my partner about something that was vitally important to me that I almost couldn't even articulate or make space for, And on the other hand, I've also been the person who's like pushing her own agenda and kind of like, yeah, okay, whatever, And if those things aren't clear in the beginning, they will bubble up later.
Oh, and then that's why their clients, they're putting in 10 offers in versus one and a half. And going back to our agenda as agents, so I have to be very careful not to impose my values. Like for me, light is super important, like bright, whatever it is. And so I remember going to a property on Gary and 25th. Okay, so you can imagine how busy that is, Gary, 25th. Like the 38 here, the 38 bus is like on your every, 10 minutes or something like that, right? And the property was right at the bus stop. And I thought, I'm not going to show this to my client, right? And then it's kind of dark and it's noisy. Do I even show this to my client? And so I can't, I'll have to relook at the book and tell you. I think it's called sensational. It's about sensory experiences. So each of us has a sensory profile. And so some people like bright and some people like dark. So imagine,
hard to believe, but they do. Yeah.
They like that cave light that makes them feel safe. And so when I ask the client, I go, well, what's important about buying a condo to you? And this client originally lived in South San Francisco near the Costco. Mm-hmm. You know that Costco, that's Daly City, Hickey Boulevard, whatever it is. And she lived in a brand new, sort of new construction, those townhouses over there, but it was 3 levels. And so imagine you're like 70, 80 years old and having to go up and down the stairs to do laundry or whatever it is. And so for her, when I asked her what's important to her, she says independence. And so this building had a elevator that she didn't. And then it also, so what I was looking as a negative about that bus stop allowed her the freedom to not have to call her daughter. She just get on the bus, 38 Garrett, down to Chinatown, do her shopping, work 2 days a week, go home without bothering her daughter, like, can you pick me up, take me, go shopping. So it's, so I had to if I didn't ask the question about what was important, like independence. So I kept on telling myself, Sabrina, it's not the light, for sunshiny, washing dishes by a window. It's about her independence. And so, and I always, whenever my clients, we do this dig deep, I write an email to them saying, this is what I heard you say. Do I have it right? And so, and it's also a reminder to me saying, stop imposing my values. My client is clear. I'm now clear. We're all clear about what this is about.
Right. And that may, that can, that's always often comes in handy when then the buyer sees a new shiny object. Like they're just happen to be visiting a friend in the marina and they've been looking for a 2-bedroom house in the Sunset, and then they're in the marina and they see a 1-bedroom condo on Marina Boulevard with a view of the bay. And they're like, that's what I want. Then we can go back to our notes and say, well, wait a minute. Having a view of the bay was not the most important thing before. Has your thinking evolved? And sometimes it does. Sometimes it shifts, but it can help people get more grounded, get more centered, get more clear.
Yeah. And that, I think that is a tough part, that as they evolve, their thinking evolves, their priorities change. And so to be able to pivot, and be open to that, I think sometimes it can be frustrating, but sometimes it's like, okay, we're getting more and more clear.
As a San Francisco native, I'm just curious. I'm not, though my children are San Francisco natives. I'm curious about when you are working with people who maybe are coming from another part of the country. And I remember I had some clients when I was a new agent who moved here from New York City, and they kept talking about how they needed to be on a high floor. They wanted to be on a high floor. And it took me a little while to understand why you'd want to be on a high floor in New York and how that didn't necessarily translate into San Francisco. Because in San Francisco, there's so many hills, there's so many views, there's so many, it's not all big buildings. Have you noticed people not getting things about San Francisco that to you are kind of like second nature, or, things that, or like reasons that we love San Francisco that may not be apparent to other people at first, that you find yourself defending or explaining? I know that I've thrown you a curveball here.
Nothing really totally comes to mind. I think we have a lot of hidden gem, like they get focused on the trendy neighborhoods like Noe Valley or, and not realizing, wow, just like, adjacent neighborhood, Glen Park or Sunnyside is just like a really cool. So part of it is introducing different neighborhoods to them. What was another, there's little pockets. We have like St. Mary's Bell, that is a little piece of magic. We don't have a lot of those little neighborhoods, but it's windy. So like there's every neighborhood has a little nuance, like, ooh, 2:00 Portola, super windy. My A-frames are like falling down. Right. I think it's just introducing them to different neighborhoods, but also on the same part of the problem with being a native is we remember what the neighborhoods used to be like.
Right.
Like, Bernal Heights, super scary. Like then it becomes like the hottest neighborhood. Like, the Sunset, blah, blah. And that becomes like the latest, hottest neighborhood. So, south of Market used to be this, or, Mission Bay didn't exist. Or so sometimes we old timers get stuck. Who's making up that? Like I think a client said, this is Baja Noe.
Baja Noe. What is that?
Went up. To me, it's the Mission, but it's like, right. It's not quite the Mission. So, East Cut.
Yeah, that's one that. Yeah. I don't know if that is really stuck. The East Cut. It sounds cool.
They have they raise their own separate funds for their own police. So,
all right, there you go.
They have their own security system there. So
I also find myself sometimes orienting toward old landmarks. Like I'll say, up by the Sears building.
Yes.
And the Sears building, well, it's gone basically, but there's a Target.
Yeah.
There now. And a lot of people will look at me. It would be like, mentioning some movie from the 80s that our sons don't know about, right?
Right.
They're like, what do you mean? Down and Out in Beverly Hills. What's that? who's Danny DeVito? So now, tell me, can you talk a little bit about how the city has changed? How is it as a Chinese American and the time that you've been here in San Francisco? How have things changed? How's Chinatown changed, for example? What do you see?
So just a little history. So despite that I grew up primarily in Diamond Heights, my heart is in Chinatown. Like sort of my heart and soul is in Chinatown. And I'm a Chinese American who doesn't speak Chinese. So there's this I'm an ABC. So my grandfather lived in Chinatown. My dad lived in Chinatown. And then, there's this exodus, then, and you're like, oh, now people live in other neighborhoods. But why is that? That is because Chinese before could only purchase property in Chinatown. You weren't allowed to buy in the Sunset. You weren't allowed to buy in it took fair housing laws and the African-American sort of civil rights movement that allowed all of us to have civil rights. So, I just want to, real estate has a history of not being kind to
discrimination.
Everyone. It's my grandfather was one of the first to own property in Atherton. Right. And so that's a story in itself. And that was possible because his Greek neighbor, that's another very important story. So, in my growing up, the only Chinatown was the one we think of as Chinatown. But now you think of Chinatown as Clement Street, Noriega, right. Terraville, or there's lots of other mini, Portola. So those are like Irving Street.
Yeah.
So there's multiple Chinatowns, and now I think we're like over 35% of the population, Chinese Americans, Asian Americans. So even so, my heart is the original, the OG Chinatown. And do you remember, were you here when there used to be the Embarcadero Freeway?
Oh, yeah.
Right. So when I lived in Diamond Heights, it was so easy to go from Diamond Heights, Monterey Boulevard, we would be in Chinatown within 15 minutes, if less. Right. You pop down by the Embarcadero, grab a parking space, and go to a Chinatown banquet. And so when the 1989 earthquake happened, do you remember sort of the double-decker freeway that collapsed in Oakland, sort of like the 880, right? Collapsed. So it became all those double-decker freeways, whether it be Fell Street, Octavia, those all of a sudden became at risk of earthquakes. And so it was, and of course the developers love the juicy idea of those coming down, because all of a sudden that gave way to things like the Ferry Building being, new hot place and stuff like that. So
though I remember thinking, how am I going to get, from the Sunset to Chinatown now, exactly. Right? Or how am I going to get to Oakland? The Embarcadero Freeway's gone, right?
Where were you commuting from? What was an important commute to you? Where were you?
Well, I was living in the city. I lived on Russian Hill at the time.
So
I used to go to the East Bay a lot.
So that was a lifeline to Chinatown. And so when that shut down, that was it cut the financial lifeline to Chinatown, and the economy sort of tumbled down. And so in some ways, people, unless you know that history of the impact on Chinatown, they don't realize that the kind of reparations is the new underground subway station.
Right.
So, we're talking 80s to it's 40 years to be in reparations.
Right.
So I can't even remember your first question. Your question was the state of
China. My question really doesn't matter. I was fascinated to hear more about, how Chinatown might have changed over the years. I mean, I've seen it to some degree, but what you talking about the reparations part, And I'm thinking about how in real estate today, we see on a regular basis, we see the covenants, conditions, and restrictions for whole neighborhoods that have clear prohibitions against ownership by African Americans, Chinese,
I think they even
Jews.
use word like, I don't know, they might even use words like mongoloids or orientals, whatever it is.
I mean, it's horrible and it's fascinating. And, but they strike it. Like they say, this doesn't apply anymore. That's the first thing that the language will say. But the language is still there because all they do is amend it,
Well,
and you still see it.
So in Anza Vista, have you ever looked at the CCNRs for that neighborhood?
No. Mm-hmm.
This was a couple of years ago. There was a home there for sale. I think Derek Chin might have been the listing agent.
I know that house. It faced south, looking. Was right on. It was right above Turk Boulevard. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I was looking at the CCNRs, and I always because we're good agents, and so we click on all those hyperlinks and the preliminary title report, and the language was such that the home could not be sold to anyone of, I don't even know the provocative language, but we know we're talking about Black, Asian, I think it was particularly Chinese, and some other group, right? I don't know all the full groups, that you could not sell to anyone of these ethnicities, nor could they ever be rented to someone of those ethnicities. But it was okay if they were hired help.
Wow.
Meaning you could have a Chinese servant in your little in-law unit only if they worked for you, but they couldn't own the home. So I actually don't want these ever to be like, people will get outraged that it's there. I want it to kept because I think it's important for people to know history. Like, I love educating my clients of all ethnicities about this. I think they need to know. Mm-hmm. This is a part of American history, San Francisco history, and people died or fought to make it different. So I don't like the idea of it like, oh, let's pull this out. I think it needs to be a part of, remain as part of the preliminary.
No, I like it. And, it evokes a conversation. And, just like what you were saying before about how clarity helps people make good decisions, knowing one's history, knowing what's gone on before. I mean, in a real basic level, like knowing what went on in a house before is important. Like, was there mold? Was there a flood? Was there a fire? You want to know these things. So you kind of want to know, what was the broader context in this neighborhood, in this city, in this country? It allows us, by knowing these things, it allows us to be better citizens, one would hope. I like to ask everybody if they have a little real estate story, something fun. And I know for sure that you've got one or two. Is there one you'd like to share with us today?
Okay. You want naked or chopped up? Which one do you want? I'm giving you a choice.
Oh, man. That's so hard. Let's start with chopped up, because that's, that kind of goes along with the knife work that you were talking about at the beginning.
So what I tell my sellers in particular is I run a 3-person team. And so my role, I don't pick paint color. That's not my thing, or doorknobs or meet inspectors. My job is to really work really hard with clients into the disclosure component.
Right.
And how you get to question if there's any crime in the neighborhood, and you can see they're like, and I say, you got to tell me. It's going to come out. And so if you don't tell me, the worst thing that can happen is they find out one day, a month later, from a neighbor, and you get sued because you didn't share a material fact. So let's just get it out. And so this was a condo in South of Market on Clara. You know that alley?
Yep, I do.
And so I've sold 3 condos in that particular building. And there was a older gentleman who on that block, he was the mayor of Clara Street, because he would sweep the alley and we would see him. And we didn't see him for a while. And one of his relatives was concerned because he hadn't answered his phone. So they called the police, and this is per the news. So I don't know this personally, but this is per newspaper articles.
Right.
The police had done a welfare check, and two guys answered the door and said, "Oh no, he went on vacation. He's traveling the world," or whatever it is. And so that's what they reported back to the family. They go, "No, he would not do that." So when they went back, I don't know how they got access again, but when they back, they found the mayor of Clara Street chopped up and put into the fish tank.
Oh, ow.
So this is a disclosure. It doesn't happen at our building. It happened across the street down a little bit, but it's still
close enough.
It's close enough. And so it's a disclosure item. So that's the story.
All right. So on that note, I think we have to.
Yeah. It's sold, and for some
no
buyers,
problem.
Single guy didn't have a problem.
Now we have to hear the naked story, because just to balance it out.
And this is a home in Golden Gate Heights, and our client, it was an elderly lady, so she was she ended up going to a nursing home, and so her nephew asked us to sell her house. And a lot of people have these curtains, and so the homes are dark, and so a trick of the trade is taking down all curtains and painting it white, and never putting the curtains back up. We just we like a nice bright home. But I had no idea she had a view. She had beautiful ocean views, but she also had another view of the guy, and it wasn't directly across the street, it was slightly to the side.
Uh-huh.
He would wear socks.
Uh-huh.
That's it. And he would fold his laundry. He would work out in wide view and completely naked. And so I included that as part of my AVID.
Yeah.
I call it the naked man disclosure.
Yeah. And, that might have been a selling point for some people. Right?
Yes.
Like
what we call
free naked show across the street.
It had like a $1 million view, and then now that's a $2 million view.
Right. All right. Well, that's a good, I'm glad we heard the chopped up fish tank story, which I'll never forget now. And the naked story. And can you tell people where they can find you? I'm going to put it in the show notes, but why don't you say also where people can find you?
So, my website is embracesf.com, and embrace S has been San
like hug,
like embrace SF. And my Instagram handle is Kimchi Mama, KIMCHEEMAMA, Kimchi Mama.
Okay. Lovely. Well, Sabrina, this was great. It's so fun to catch up with you, and we're going to have to do this another time.
Part 2.
But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.